afternoon, everybody. My name is Derek Pratt, and I'm the Director of Education here at the Erie Canal Museum. Thank you all very much for joining us today, and thank you as well to the Winifred and DeVillo Sloan Family Fund for supporting our lecture series this year. Yes, we would also like to thank the Central New York Humanities Corridor, which was able to help fund this talk and your lunch with an award by the Mellon Foundation. Thank you as well for coming, and to the numerous American Guild of Organist chapters who have helped promote this talk. You can also work with the local chapter after this to build an organ. So you'll be just like the folks Anne's going to talk about. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the Erie Canal Museum is itself located on the homeland of the Onondaga Nation, Central Firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and that the Erie Canal is located on the homelands of all members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. The Mohawk, Oneida, Tuscarora, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca Nations. We recognize that the Erie Canal played a major role in the devastation of their traditional ways of living, negative effects of which linger to this day. Here at the Erie Canal Museum, we are committed to taking actions as best we can to do our part in addressing these wrongs through education and inclusion, including efforts like our partnership with Onondaga Historical Association and the Scano Great Lawn Peace Center, reinterpretation of our exhibits, and public programs offering important first steps in that process. We hope you can all join us in these efforts. And the impact of the Erie Canal has been transformative in a number of ways. Here at the Erie Canal Museum, our mission is to engage the public in this story of the Erie Canal's transformative impacts on peoples and places in the past, present, and future. With the expanded transportation and communication offered by the Erie Canal, industry and culture were dramatically transformed, including in the field of music, as we will see today. But before we get started, I'd like to highlight that this lecture is just one in our 2026 Sloan Lecture Series, and we have some really great ones planned for the rest of the year in addition to this. I highly recommend considering signing up for or renewing an annual pass, since you won't want to miss any of our speakers, and if you sign up for that, you'll be automatically registered for the entire 2026 series, including recordings. Our next talk is on March 19th at noon, and will feature Oswego area historian Mary K. Stone discussing the incredible Oswegan Dr. Mary Edwards Walker, an abolitionist, women's rights advocate, the only woman to have ever won the Medal of Honor, and a radical reformer against gender norms. You won't want to miss it. I'm also excited to let you know about an upcoming event we're working on with the Onondaga Historical Association. On August 12th, we are partnering with them to offer a bus trip from Syracuse to Rochester for a tour of the Mount Hope Cemetery, as well as the Susan B. Anthony Museum and House. Registration is now open, and members, which you should all become, get a $25 discount. You'll want to hurry. Tickets are going fast. I also quickly want to thank the Syracuse Orchestra for a donation of gift certificates to one of their shows this year. And you can also see them here, right in this room, an ensemble, not the whole orchestra. That keeps freaking people out when I say the Syracuse Orchestra is coming, on July 22nd, which is also the birthday of our historic Waylock building. And there's a whole lot more going on this year, but only so much time. I'll just say subscribe to our e-newsletter, which you'll all get a link to, in addition to the recording for this talk, so you can get updates on everything going on for the rest of the year. But now, I'd like to introduce our presenters. First, we will have Laurence Libin. For 33 years, Laurence Libin was curator of musical instruments at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, meanwhile teaching occasionally in the graduate schools of Columbia and New York universities, and at Juilliard, Upon retiring, he was named honorary curator of Steinway and Sons and elected president of the Oregon Historical Society. He served Oxford University Press as editor-in-chief of the Grove Dictionary of Musical Instruments and continues to publish and advocate internationally for the documentation and preservation of historic instruments. Anne Laver is Associate Professor of Organ and University Organist at Syracuse University's Setner School of Music. Her current scholarship centers on organ music at the 19th and 20th century World's Fairs, and a new documentary film about organ culture in the United States with Will Frazier. She also maintains an active profile as a solo recitalist and especially enjoys working with living composers to broaden and diversify the organ repertoire. What, Bach wasn't enough? He's not here in person, but he is on Zoom right now, and you'll see him shortly. Will Frazier is an independent filmmaker, author, and organist whose extensive film library about pipe organs has garnered multiple accolades from leading music magazines and a devoted following of organ enthusiasts. He also writes fiction, and his first novel, Cloister, was published in 2025. He is fascinated by America and has made 3 films about the country so far: Soul Searching for the Blues, Once Upon a Time in Knoxville, and Cowboy and Preacher, The Life and Times of Try Robinson. The last film premiered in Hollywood at the 2018 Dances with Films Festival and had primetime broadcast nationally across the USA on PBS World. You're not going to get a sneak peek of his next film, but more on that later. So now, without further ado, here's Laurence Libin.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you to use your imaginations, close your eyes, and imagine it's July of 1830. You're in Albany. You're heading towards Buffalo after a tedious trip already up the Hudson River. This is years before the railroads came through. Your legs are wobbly, you're high-strung, stressed, heavy-handed treatment has upset your temperament. What are you? You're a piano. Faced with either a rough and slow and overland passage by wagon or a smooth and less expensive and safer journey through the new Erie Canal, which one are you going to choose? Obviously, you're going to take the canal boat. But wait a minute, what about dampness? Dampness and humidity, moisture are just murder on pianos. But what really hurts is fast changes back and forth, dry, damp, dry, damp. And that's more likely to occur on a wagon than on a canal boat. Canal boat's humidity is going to be high, but it's more or less stable. Okay, so you're a piano, you're heading west, you're not in a hurry. The Erie Canal is the way to go, and many pianos went. The first ones were probably taken along to furnish somebody's house. And later, as pianos became more popular, population grew, pianos were sent by manufacturers to stock stores, music stores in towns along the canal. And soon, pianos were being manufactured along the canal. As they replaced old-fashioned harpsichords, pianos stood for progress. They inhabited a forward-looking, rapidly industrializing nation that prized innovation, increasing middle-class affluence, a liberal patent system, and protective tariffs that discouraged imports, all buoyed the American piano industry. Ambitious manufacturers touted dozens of patents for improvements, mostly as a way of differentiating their products from their competitors. And useful or not, these inventions represented progress and creativity and novelty and optimism, all cultural values that were embodied by these newfangled pianos. Now keep in mind that instrument innovation normally occurs in response for demand from amateurs. Those are the people who buy most of the instruments. And amateurs want more durable, more affordable, more reliable instruments, suitable for their own home use mostly. And the Erie Canal helped satisfy this demand across a huge territory. And along with the pianos and their music, went a whole complex of socializing and civilizing behaviors. In other words, harmony, generated mostly by women. We'll return to gender, but first note that in 1825, a Boston piano maker, Alpheus Babcock, invented the cast iron frame. That was the basis for the modern piano's development. Babcock's patent was foundational for the piano in America. It reinforced the wooden case against the rigors of the American climate, and it also accommodated high tensile strength steel strings, which were another 19th century innovation. So these stronger strings, along with the more powerful keyboard actions, increased the piano's dynamic range, which was better to serve the expansive needs of romantic music. At the same time, the piano's keyboard was growing from 5 octaves to 5.5, 6.5 octaves. More and more keys meant more and more strings, which gave greater tension on the piano's case, which was what iron framing was intended to resist. So here you are, a state-of-the-art piano, up to playing the latest music and carrying westward not only impressive tonal resources, but also new technologies. 19th century American piano manufacturers, centered mostly in the Northeast, were at the cutting edge of advances in metallurgy, precision woodworking, mechanical engineering, and factory production methods. And the Erie Canal helped spread these Yankee technologies westward from big piano factories, such as Steinway's in New York and Chickering's in Boston, to smaller workshops that sprang up all the way to Chicago and beyond. At the same time, the canal brought raw materials, such as timber, closer and within easier reach of the New York and Boston manufacturers, and that helped control their production costs, keep costs low. The canal also facilitated distribution of locally made instruments, and most importantly, in 1908, the famous Wurlitzer Piano and Organ Company moved its headquarters from Cincinnati to North Tonawanda, New York, just north of Buffalo, the canal's western end. And this relocation helped Wurlitzer ship big, heavy instruments more efficiently all over the Northeast and the Midwest and down to the port of New York. Already before the Civil War, Poughkeepsie and Albany and Erie and Buffalo all had their own piano factories. Their lower overhead costs and labor costs made their instruments generally less expensive than Boston and New York instruments, and they offered local customers reassurance because if something went wrong, the manufacturer was there in their town to correct it or else suffer a damaged reputation. Also, it was way more convenient for buyers to try out a new piano nearby than one in a distant showroom. And of course, pianos that were made locally were less subject to damage or delayed transit. Now, upstate New York piano factories usually copied other manufacturers' designs, the big guys. They copied their designs, but they added their own distinctive improvements. For example, around 1847, the Boardman and Gray Piano Company in Albany introduced the so-called Dolce Campana, or sweet bells attachment. And this was a pedal-operated device that lowered weights onto the bridge of the piano and thus muted its sound. And it also made possible a kind of vibrato effect when you pump the pedal. That attachment, the Dolce Campana, inspired a waltz of the same name by the Albany composer Oliver Shaw and helped Boardman and Gray earn a premium at the 1848 State Fair at Buffalo, a gold medal at the Syracuse State Fair in 1849, and finally a medal at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Now, Boardman and Gray's initiative wasn't unusual. Competing manufacturers vied for attention by advertising dozens of these so-called improvements. Most of them led nowhere. But it's remarkable that so much ferment was happening long before any American-born pianist or composer for the piano achieved much recognition, except maybe Louis Moreau Gottschalk. But Gottschalk's career played out mostly in Europe and Latin America. The point is that pianos were big business, made more profitable by the Erie Canal. Already in 1831, Albany's main music and sheet music dealer, Meacham and Pond, advertised to accept used pianos in trade for new ones. And one of Meacham and Pond's suppliers was the local Albany piano firm of Osborne and King. Osborne had come west from Boston seeking opportunity in this new frontier, so to speak. And later, as his business succeeded and grew, he relocated to New York City. Meanwhile, Boardman and Gray began production in Albany in 1835, and they succeeded by hiring experienced workers from New York City, had them move north to Albany. And Boardman and Gray had an agent in New York City by 1865, I think. There were about 4 or 5 other piano makers active in Albany alone at that time. Some of them were, one of them was a Bavarian immigrant who patented a new kind of piano action that went nowhere. Another guy, Myron Decker, started a piano factory in Albany in 1856, and 2 years later, he won a prize at the State Fair in Syracuse. Not overlooked should be the makers of piano legs and piano stools, because they also benefited by this market for pianos. It's hard, therefore, to overstate the piano's importance as an economic engine. For example, sheet music publishers, who were often also instrument dealers, issued hundreds of short piano solos, mostly destined for home enjoyment. Often these ephemeral pieces were dedicated to local celebrities or well-known musicians, or they marked occasions such as the opening of a new school. Piano arrangements, including duets, featured hits from minstrel shows and brought highlights of orchestral music to listeners who couldn't get to concerts. Pianos, of course, also accompanied dancing and singing and family celebrations, not only in homes, but in schools and churches and taverns, all kinds of social gathering places. Piano sheet music often sported attractive title pages, illustrated title pages, sometimes in color. So even after the music became stale, the issues were saved and bound together as family keepsakes. And these volumes of piano music could be passed down along with a cherished piano from mother to daughter to granddaughter, helping to connect families across generations. And pianos themselves accrued their own unique histories. They embodied stories of their acquisition, how they got transferred from one place to another, all kinds of traditions associated with particular instruments. So giving up a treasured old piano also meant losing its associated memories. In any event, pianos and the activities surrounding them helped build a sense of community. Popular music, especially on topical themes, was a strong social adhesive. The sentimental and patriotic appeal of piano-accompanied songs, such as Stephen Foster's, for example, transcended social boundaries and helped to promote connections, even at the same time as they also promoted racial and ethnic stereotypes. So it's complicated. But wait, there's more. The piano's rosewood and mahogany woodwork and its ivory and ebony keys put players' hands literally in touch with the products of foreign colonial exploitation. But for American consumers, the pianos didn't represent imperialism. Rather, they stood for good taste and breeding and wealth and leisure time. In other words, it was a status symbol. This was so even when the piano wasn't being played, but just sat there, silently dominating a parlor. Now, at least up until the Civil War, for most middle-class American families, especially in the provinces, a piano was likely the most sophisticated, maybe the most expensive furnishing in the home. Not only did it confer status, it also represented the culture of female domesticity. Keyboard instruments had always been favored for women because playing them wasn't physically awkward or strenuous, but it developed digital dexterity, which was useful in intricate crafts such as sewing. Performing at the piano also displayed a pretty symmetrical posture and proper deportment, and it didn't distort the body the way playing the violin or, God forbid, a cello did. Also, learning to play the piano often involved copying music by hand, and this exercise was important for gaining musical literacy, which was a necessary accomplishment for a socially aspiring young lady. Most importantly, unlike portable instruments like the guitar, pianos kept young women safely at home, practicing and playing under parental or spousal oversight. Okay, this is big business. Despite this restriction keeping women at home, it offered them an outlet for emotional self-expression that could have been improper or impossible to convey in words or interpretive dance. I mean, you just don't do that. But at the piano, it was okay. And another advantage of the piano is that unlike a violinist or a singer, if the instrument was out of tune, it wasn't the pianist's fault, it was the piano's fault, right? As late as the 1820s, keyboard players normally maintained their own instruments. They tuned for themselves. But with the piano's increasing bulk and mechanical complexity, this work became too burdensome for Victorian ladies. Instead, piano tuners now intervene, and they distance players from a hands-on knowledge of their instruments' innards, right? So there's a kind of separation between the player and the instrument. And outside big cities, piano tuners were scarce. And in rural upstate New York, an itinerant piano tuner might come through just once a year. So a well-maintained, in-tune piano indicated careful home management and ample disposable income. Along with piano technicians, pianos brought teachers, and piano teaching offered women a gender-appropriate employment outside the home and gave opportunity for social connections that otherwise might have been hard to form. It's worth emphasizing that right into the 20th century, and maybe still today, most amateur pianists have been female, even though fathers and husbands usually paid for the instruments. In Victorian literature, piano tone is most commonly described as sweet, not powerful and brilliant. That came later, much later. And it's no coincidence, I think, that pianos in the home were normally played with the lid kept shut and often covered with a protective shawl. And this was done to preserve their finish and preserve their tuning, but it also subdued their sound. I think I'd be stretching a point to suggest that this acoustic suppression echoed a repression of women's feelings, but you can work on that on your own. Anyway, 19th century piano case design reflected feminine taste. Strong historical parallels can easily be seen between domestic piano styles of the cases and the legs and so on, and changing fashions of women's dress. We see this, for example, in comparing the straight, simple lines, slender lines of empire dress and early piano legs, which are narrow and straight, and then the curvaceous and voluptuous, dark and heavy Victorian fashions, which are echoed in the heavier, voluptuous, carved, bulging shapes of piano legs. Of course, you needed these heavier Victorian legs because of the additional weight of the iron frame and also to withstand vigorous pedaling of romantic music. So these things all work together. It's complicated, but it's a lot of fun. My point, though, is that especially in domestic settings, pianos functioned as instruments for social control, validating their owners' values. For one thing, pianos kept everybody inside. Listeners had to come in and sit down if they're going to listen. They had to observe a certain decorum. Players, at least, had to be seated. and attentive listeners had to be quiet. And learning to play the piano required concentration and self-discipline and a lot of time, free time. So-called square and upright pianos, which were by far the most common models, were designed to stand against the wall, not freestanding. So the player had her back to the listeners modestly, even as she was showing off her charming musicality. Perhaps most importantly, pianos served as secular altarpieces around which families and friends gathered in harmony, directed by the woman at the keyboard, accompanied maybe by the woman at the keyboard, but she set the tone, she set the rhythm for the occasion. So these families gathered in harmony to celebrate their community and to share spiritual refreshment around the piano. And moreover, buying and maintaining and learning to play the piano entailed a virtuous sacrifice towards higher non-material goals. Thus, in many ways, pianos and their music and the social habits that they involved exerted a civilizing force. And by spreading pianos and these related activities all the way into the Northwest Territory, the Erie Canal helped to democratize American music making and contributed immeasurably to shaping American culture. That's all I've got to say. On the nose. Oh, boy. That's called practice rehearsal. Sir.
A couple questions. Just for the economy of the pianos and the bows, were most of these pianos upright pianos that were made along the canal?
Most of them were square pianos, the so-called rectangular form. If you see the melodeon that's sitting outside here, larger versions of those rectangular pianos, that was by far the most common model. Uprights were much bigger and heavier and more awkward to move.
So, but like a baby grand would never, ever be on.
I wouldn't say never, ever, but they were very, in the period I'm talking about, and before the Civil War,
Yeah.
Grand pianos were very rare,
Okay.
very, very unusual.
Okay, my second question is, do you have any documentation of people performing the piano while they're traveling on the canal?
The question is whether there's any documentation of people playing the piano on the canal boat as it's going down the canal. I don't know of any, but I'm sure that somebody's diary or would mention such a thing if it occurred. I don't know of any evidence of it.
Thank you.
It would be difficult though, because by and large, the cargo boats were not carrying amateur women pianists at the same time.
What's the largest manufacturer of pianos along the canal?
The largest manufacturer of pianos along the canal was probably Boardman and Gray in Albany. We don't really have statistics for a lot of the smaller makers because the business records just weren't kept. But we know that that particular company was very prolific, and a lot of their Boardman and Gray pianos still survive. So judging by the number of surviving instruments made by different companies along the canal, it seems that Boardman and Gray was the largest manufacturer and the longest lived, because most of these places shut down after the Civil War, and Boardman and Gray kept going to the end of the century. There's another question, ma'am?
You mentioned square pianos, and Steinway, of course, named some. And then in the 5th edition of the Groves Dictionary, I found a reference that Steinway got as many as he could get his hands on and had a bonfire, but it's not the New Jersey bonfire or others. I've never found a citation for that. And there is a square piano at Christmas at Lorenzo in Casanova. If you want to hear one, it's in great shape. Thank you.
This was a question about the square pianos, and there's all kinds of stories about manufacturers at the end of the 19th century and early 20th century gathering up quantities of square pianos and burning them as a way of showing that they were obsolete. And the upright piano was the piano of today. And these seem largely to be myths. There was a story that there was a fire in Atlantic City in which hundreds of square pianos were set on fire, and that turns out just to be a myth. My colleague, William Hetrick, has done a lot of research on that particular phenomenon. So makers just made up stories and planted them in newspapers as a way of showing. And the reason that they had to do this was that the square pianos were so well built and so solid that they just didn't wear out. And the market became saturated. If you wanted to sell new pianos, you had to give people a reason to get rid of the old one. So they tried to make them look obsolete, but they weren't.
You can't get them up to tune either, and so you can't play with other instruments that well. And then the soiree, and I heard somebody was going to play this musical song and square piano, and so his niece was playing. He said, "I can't play with this instrument; it's too long."
Oh, okay. This was a remark. I'm repeating it for the Zoom about square pianos not being able to be tuned up to modern pitch so they can play with modern instruments. But of course, they weren't intended for that purpose. They were intended to play with the instruments and at the pitch level of their own day, which was a little bit lower than that of today. But you know, a square piano that's well maintained in good condition can be tuned up to A440, which is the nominal pitch of today. Very few people have seen and heard and had an opportunity to play on a 19th century square piano in really good condition. And piano tuners today don't want to work on them because it's a lot of work and it's hard to find spare parts and so on. But in their day, they were wonderful instruments and they inspired composers and famous musicians toured with them. So there was nothing wrong with those pianos. Sir?
Yes, excuse me. You mentioned the Albany maker. Any idea of how many pianos a year he was making?
That's a good question. How many pianos a year were these smaller companies making? There is evidence about this, and a company that might have 6 workmen could produce maybe 2 pianos a week. Okay, and they worked seasonally because it depended a lot on the weather and about light, about daylight. And there's a price book from 1835 of the New York Society of Journeyman Piano Makers in which it specifies the cost of each operation in making a piano. And one of the things that was listed in how much money it costs for candles for working in winter, you know. But it depends on the size of the workforce, but generally 2 pianos a week from a small shop, and maybe not 12 months of the year, but 10 months of the year output, because a lot of these guys also were farming, had other things to do. They weren't working full time at making pianos. But we don't really know how many pianos each individual firm provided to the market because the records don't exist. They do for Steinway and for Chickering, but not for the small companies.
We have a question on Stu of what is the cost of the piano compared to the average income?
Yes, it's hard to say. You have to specify what time because there was inflation, there was all kinds of cost things, but generally between $150 and $350 would get you a good middle-priced square piano or an upright piano. Now that could be a year's wages for a farmer or a small craftsman. It was a sacrifice, but it was probably not more than a piano would cost today relative to what incomes are. So it entailed a sacrifice. It was a lot of money, but you could afford it. And during the 19th century, advertisers like Steinway invented plans whereby you could pay over time. You could rent a piano and the rental charges would be applied to the purchase of the piano after a certain period of time. So there were all kinds of ways of making pianos affordable if you didn't have the cash in hand. Sir.
Just wondering about Alfred Dolesville. Is that pre or post canal? Is that because of the canal that it's there? Or?
I don't think it was because of the canal, but it certainly didn't hurt. Dolgeville was named for a guy, my stuffing is coming up, a guy named Dolge who provided materials to piano manufacturers. provided piano hammers, piano keys, all kinds of materials used in piano construction. He was a kind of wholesaler. And the town was named for him, Dolgeville, because he was such an important industrialist at that time. I'm sure that his products were shipped by the canal, but I can't say that it's because of the canal that he settled and started his business there. Maybe it's time to move on. Okay? Thank you.
It's really, really wonderful to be here. This is a fun event for us musicians, connecting with this museum that I've admired for quite some time. So it's really, really cool to be able to share this material with you. You know, Lori is a tremendous expert. I, on the other hand, am going to share some material from a book by Stephen Pennell. And I wanted to get him to come and give this talk. And he said, that's all right, you just go ahead and do it. So most of what I'm going to tell you, a case study about the Andrews organ building firm, is from that book. And I have it with me today if you want to have a look afterwards. But Stephen is really the expert there, him and Scott Huntington, that have done a lot of work on the Andrews firm and Upstate organ building. So I'll just preface this with thinking back to 1810, when DeWitt Clinton first began surveying for the Erie Canal. When did the canal become complete? I'm sure many of you know. 1825, just had the anniversary. But back at that time, there was only a fledgling American organ building industry, and it was concentrated in the eastern cities of Boston and New York. There were some organ builders active in Boston and New York, and they became more active with the Embargo Act of 1807, when it was harder to import materials and musical instruments from Europe. Then the War of 1812 compounded that. So churches in these growing urban centers started to shift their attention to native builders to supply them with instruments. And I just wanted to share the scene of some of those firms. So we have the center of Boston, and William Goodrich was the one that started building organs in early 1800s with his brother Ebenezer, and also Thomas Appleton. So from Goodrich's 12-year career, he built 38 church organs and 11 chamber organs, but he also was mentor for several apprentices who went off and started their own firms, like Thomas Appleton, who put out about 40 organs in his career. The Hook brothers, Elias and George Greenleaf Hook, apprenticed with Goodrich, and then they started their own firm in Boston in 1831. They were joined by Francis Hastings in the mid-1800s and had a very successful company throughout the 19th century. And also George and William Stevens, who apprenticed with Goodrich and took over the shop when William Goodrich passed away. And then William Johnson established an organ building firm in Westfield, Massachusetts. So that was kind of the Boston area. And then New York had its own homegrown organ builders, Thomas Hall, who opened his first shop in 1817, and Henry Urban, you might have heard that name. Urban was known for really producing really high quality organs, and his shop continued till 1884. And then George Jardine was another one who was a contemporary. So these were the centers on the East Coast, but as newly incorporated communities in upstate New York set up their churches, they would look to these East Coast builders to supply them with instruments, since there was hardly anybody building organs in this area back then. There's a little bit of limited evidence of organ building prior to the canal in Guilford, one manual organ there, but not a whole lot happening. And part of the reason for that was the transportation systems hadn't come through to make that possible. All right. The canal then made it possible to ship instruments easily, or more easily, I should say. And you heard a lot about that already in Lori's talk, but I want to give you one example of a church near and dear to my heart. This was the first church where I was music director in Rochester, St. Luke and St. Simon's Episcopal Church. And it was the first Episcopal church in Rochester, founded by Nathaniel Rochester. It is the oldest public building still in use in the city of Rochester. And there is evidence that the urban firm shipped its organ to St. Luke's along the Erie Canal. So I thought that was that's October 1825. So right when the canal was ready. And I thought that was, as I came across that in the works list of Henry Urban, I thought, oh, gotta show that picture. So the canal really opened up all kinds of possibilities for all kinds of business ventures. And it may have been the thing that enticed the Andrews family to move from Connecticut to Waterville, New York in 1821. Here's a map of New York. At that time, Waterville was known as Sangersfeld, which is the little circle there south, and Utica is the circled area north. Waterville is 13 miles southwest of Utica, and it was a place where there was a lot of hops farming, apparently. So that was a draw. And Alvinza Andrews was a carpenter, a joiner, and he may have come there because he saw possibilities for business that the canal provided. He married Mary Norton around 1825, and they had 3 children, Harriet, Julia, and George. And the accounts of Alvinza say that he was a bright and savvy business person, but it's kind of unclear how or why he got into instrument building. Apparently, the first instruments he experimented with were seraphines, a musical instrument kind of similar to a harmonium, maybe. Yeah. And I kind of wonder if he was just experimenting at that time and potentially saw that he could get into organ building. He strikes me as a smart person looking for a business angle. And he probably noticed the population growth and saw how these East Coast builders were being asked to supply organs to the new churches that were being established. In his early years, he would have witnessed 3 urban organs being installed in Utica. The first in 1824 at First Presbyterian Church, modest organ, 1 manual and 12 stops. And then another one a little bit later, 1831 at Christ Church, Dutch Reformed Church. And then the First Presbyterian Church decided to upgrade to a 26 stop organ, and they brought Urban back. So probably Andrews was noticing this. He may have been at these dedications or attended these churches and, was probably aware of what was going on. And that might have been it. But I think the real moment of opportunity for him came when he met Henry T. Levi, perhaps when the Hooks were installing a new organ for St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Albany in 1836. And records show that Levi had worked as a pipe maker and voicer in the Hook shop in the 1830s. So he may have been on that installation, who knows? But it was the experience with pipes that Andrews needed to become an organ builder and establish an organ shop. And it seems as if Andrews made Levi an offer he couldn't refuse. One that included a significant plot of land in Waterville and a chance to develop a new organ building business that would serve this growing New York communities and points west with the help of the canal system. So Andrews became quite a successful organ building shop. By the 1850s, he was supplying organs to points east and west, Washington, D.C., and he was contributing organs even to the population centers in Boston, Chicago, New York that had organ builders, so was competitive that way. He shipped organs to all over the place, including Sri Lanka, Honolulu, and India. So that's pretty impressive. By 1850, the census report said that the Andrews shop was the sixth largest organ building in the country. And Andrews moved from Sangersfield to Utica in 1852 to set up a new shop right on the canal. And they really established a center for organ building that continued for almost 150 years, even after the Andrews son of Alvinza moved out to California. They had really established Utica as a center for organ building. I would say there are several factors that contributed to Andrew's success. The first was that Alvinza was described as an intelligent, organized, and skilled woodworker. So he had the acumen. He partnered with H.T. Levi, who was an experienced pipe maker, voicer, and an organist himself. So Levi actually was the one to demonstrate a lot of these organs when they were all put together. Something we've heard, the second point that we've heard already, is that the close proximity to materials really was advantageous to these shops, whether they be piano or organ. So being up here, Andrews was close to lumber and to leather in particular, and it was easy to get these materials back and forth along the canal. Here's a map of Utica, and I don't know if you can see the little red dots, but number one is where Andrew set up his factory, and the line through that, the dark line through the map is the Erie Canal. So you see that it was right there. They could unload out their back door onto a canal boat. So it couldn't be easier. And then there was also the Shenango Canal that went north-south. So they had this nexus of canals right there in Utica. They most definitely shipped their organs via canal. You can even see in some of the contracts with churches that it stipulates, this is one to the Congregational Church in Oberlin, Ohio, that received an Andrews organ. And the contract says, quote, "It should be safely boxed and delivered on board a canal boat." So we know that that's how it got there. And here's the picture of the sanctuary with the Andrews organ. It's kind of cool. The other thing that helped Andrews and other organ builders at this time was changing attitudes towards instruments in church. The Presbyterian Church was notoriously slow to adopt organs, but in Oneida in particular, there was a singing teacher, one Dr. Thomas Hastings, who was a really compelling advocate for using organs to improve congregational singing. He thought the state of congregational singing was appalling. And he was one of these ones compiling tune books and selling them. And so organs were really going to help make singing better in this area. So the local Presbyterian churches adopted early organs much earlier here than nationally because of Thomas Hastings and his advocacy. So we see some of the purpose of these instruments in that little anecdote, and it was to support singing. And then finally, the population boom in this area contributed to the demand for not only church organs, but parlor organs. And after the canal was completed, many of the people that worked on the canal settled around here. So that also contributed to population spikes in the villages and cities along this route. This is population of Utica in 1813. Started out as 1,700 people, and by 1860 it was 22,000. So like every 10 years it was almost doubling. So must have been an interesting time. So these favorable conditions allowed other upstate cities to sprout organ building enterprises. Garrett House in Buffalo was one. Giles Beach in Gloverville near Albany was another. Augustus Bacchus in Albany, they were all contemporaries of Andrews. But Utica was definitely the most active center. The activity attracted British-born John G. Marklove, who moved to Utica to work for Andrews as a voicer in 1854. Interestingly, disrupting the nice partnership he had with Levi and prompting Levi to move away and get upset, join the Johnson firm. It sounds like there's a little drama there. But Marklove then quit Andrews and set up his own competing shop in Utica. So there are two organ building firms in Utica Center in the mid 1800s. When Alvinza died in 1862, he willed the business to his son George, who kept the business going for the next few decades before moving out to Oakland, California, where he kept building organs until the 1906 earthquake really devastated his firm and put him out of business. At this point, I wanted to acknowledge Ben Merchant, who's here. Could you wave to everybody, Ben? Ben is local organ builder, has owned his own business, Kerner and Merchant, here for many, many years, takes care of the Syracuse University organs, and just is a great partner and friend. He's going to show us how to build the organ at the end. But I wanted to point him out because he has taken care of many of these Andrews organs that are in our area. And if you have specific questions about the organs themselves, we can send them to Ben. And then also, these are the sources I mentioned at the beginning. Stephen Pennell has written a book called Organ Building Along the Erie and Shenango Canals, Alvinza and George and Andrews of Utica, New York, and a few other articles about organ building activity up here. And all the pictures I'm showing are from that book. This is an image of Mountain Vernon Presbyterian Church, the first Andrews church organ that they installed as early as 1837. It was later moved to a different building, but you get a sense of what these organs looked like. And here's Oneida Baptist Church. So we're going to use this particular Andrews organ as a segue into our next segment. But first I wanted to just summarize that the story of the Andrews firm reminds us that organ building reflects its time and place. It always does, it always has. It demonstrates how a conscientious and skilled businessman in Alvinza Andrews leveraged the materials in his backyard, the human capital in the person of H.T. Levi and other workers, and a growing American desire for music making to develop a successful business. But I would say more than any of these factors, it was the Erie Canal system that allowed his business to flourish and achieve global reach. This is one of the places that flourished during Andrew's tenure, Oneida. This photo is from a field trip a group of students and I took back in October. And this organ was built in 1872 and installed in the church in January 1873. And one of the reasons why we went to this place, not only was to give them a sense of like early organ building activity and their regional history that goes along with it, but I have been working on a documentary film with British filmmaker Will Fraser, and we decided to focus the kind of case studies for the film on this region in upstate New York. So we wanted something that would show the kinds of organs that people were using in the mid 19th century, and this instrument was a good example of that. So at this point, I'd like to play the video clip. This is a very rough cut of some of the footage we got. It's about 5 minutes long. And it describes this organ and describes one of the pieces that was performed at the dedication concert. And before we do that, I'm just going to read a little description from the Oneida Dispatch of January 17th, 1873, which kind of gives you a little bit of the idea of what you're going to see. So this describes the dedication ceremony. Quote, "The organ concert given by the ladies of the Baptist Church in this village on Tuesday last was in all respects a decided success. The attendance was good and the entertainment was superior. The superb new organ just put in place was played in a highly artistic and pleasing manner by Mrs. J. Atwell, organist of the Central Baptist Church in Syracuse, while the vocal assistance of the quartet choir of the same church, under the leadership of Mr. J. H. Lowe, was equally entertaining and worth of the highest commendation. We should by no means fail to notice the part sustained by our home choir of these various selections, namely Nearer My God to Thee by J.R. Thomas. That was perhaps the most noticeable and exceedingly well performed." All right, I think we're ready to watch this little clip.
The organ behind me was built by George N. Andrews of Utica, New York, who was the son of Alvinza Andrews. Alvinza established a blossoming organ building culture in Utica as the Erie Canal started to bring the population westward and opened up all sorts of opportunities for commerce and culture along this corridor. This organ was built in 1872 and installed in the early days of 1873. We have wonderful newspaper accounts of the installation and the dedication services, and we even know one of the pieces that was performed, an arrangement of Nearer My God to Thee.
Yeah, so I'm Pastor Terry Brown, and we're at the Oneida Baptist church I grew up in. My mother was the choir director for over 30 years, and soon after I was born, I was brought in a bassinet for choir practice right over there by that piano. And
I love that.
Some other churches have gone to bands, or they have praise groups and this and such. But here at Oneida Baptist, we really love a traditional service. We enjoy the organ. We use hymns still. There's no video here, and we really, we dial it back every Sunday to when, a time when this church was actually built. And that has been the service of worship here, since that time.
In 1825, the Erie Canal was completed, and more people moved westward. These communities set up beautiful, modest churches, and they really wanted pipe organs to lead worship. Initially, they were importing organs from Boston or from New York, where there were established building firms, but the canal allowed builders like Andrews to develop a shop and ship organs easily across the waters throughout the West. This organ is a great example of the kind of instruments that were popping up all around this area in the late 19th century. They were meant to support singing, primarily. They were not meant as recital instruments, but a quartet of singers would lead the hymns along with an organist, and this beautiful, sweet, full sound was what inspired congregations through the end of the 19th century into the 20th. This organ was installed in 1873, and we know from a newspaper article in the Oneida Dispatch that they sang this hymn, Nearer My God to Thee, at the dedication ceremony with the organ accompanying. So that's what we're going to do today. That's why we're singing this. Would you lead us, Ashley?
Sure.
All right.
You know, the piano is one thing, and it's a wonderful instrument. But with that organ, it announces that it's time for worship. And everybody knows, and everybody stands, and everybody jumps into that first hymn because they know it's time for worship.
So there's something special about the organ.
Absolutely. In fact, we had a celebration of life for a long-term member of the church. And they came back to have the service here. And part of that was they needed to have this organ at their mother's service.
Yeah, and it speaks to how the organ is with us at our very important moments in life to mark these milestones.
The weddings that have been here, to hear the wedding march on that organ is much better than, on a piano or, I mean, it's just profound. It just says, stand everyone because it's time for celebration. So,
Yeah, so we've got one more clip to show in just a minute, but I want to introduce Will Fraser now, because he's the one that put that together. We spent all day in Oneida, and I should also mention our awesome film crew, Call of the Loon Productions, Jake Coulter and Kristen Carton, who actually have done a lot of work here with the Erie Canal Museum and the Heritage Corridor, making videos and films, and they're working on our project too. So pretty excited about that. And the students many of them are here. Would you guys stand up if you were in that clip? Yeah, so Michael, you saw him at the organ. Wave, Michael. Yeah, Michael's an organist, and he's intern working on this project, as is Dan, who's filming in the back right now, and Wilson, who's a filmmaker himself. So we've got many students working on this film, and that's been one of the coolest parts of it, to incorporate them in the work.
Hello, greetings from London. Does that work?
Yeah.
Is that what you want?
Yeah, great. So why don't you say hello, tell us a little bit about our project, or if you want to speak about that clip, and then we'll show the trailer too.
Yeah. So, well, hello everyone, and greetings from sort of world headquarters of Fugue State Films here in London. This small attic room is where it all happens. I've just got some very simple things to say about the film. First, this is not a film which stands in isolation. What I'm trying to do with the films I've been making over the last few years is to create a set of documentary and performance and demonstration films about each important part of the organ repertoire, whether that's done by geographical location, chronological period, or composer. So in other words, you might have films about, for instance, Cavalier Cole, which sort of stands in for 19th century France, or the English organ, which is sort of that self-explanatory, or Max Reger or J.S. Bach, films about them. The American organ, I think, is an extremely exciting project. And I think also, despite American cultural might in a lot of respects, I think America's contribution to organ music is undervalued outside America. And so I think it's a good film to make from that perspective. So this film will be part of what is almost a sort of mini encyclopedia of the organ and its repertoire, and it will trace what we hope is the whole story. In other words, 3 centuries or however many centuries have been of American organ building, and with representative instruments of each sort of major school or builder along that time. Now, obviously, when I say this, we are unfortunately making this in the real world, and so, you know, we can't, America's kind of a big place, and so we can't film everything. But then that brings us, I think, to our location of Syracuse and upstate New York, and in fact, even the Erie Canal. We are pretty much able to tell the whole story of the American organ using instruments which are found in upstate New York, in the sort of area including Buffalo, Syracuse, Ithaca, Rochester, and places kind of in between, such as Oneida, because for whatever reason, there was an amazingly rich cultural heritage of organ building historically, and then this has been maintained not largely, or helped certainly by the universities which are present. This has been maintained at the present with incredible new instruments being built. And so it's amazing how much of the overall American story we can tell from upstate New York, with the organs being representative. And then also the story of the Erie Canal, I think, is of interest in itself, but it is also representative of the kind of development that was happening throughout America. So it might not have been a canal in one place, it might have been a railroad, or it might have been a wagon trail, who knows, but there were these kind of relationships between expansion and economic history and the cultural history that went with it. In terms of the film itself, so I think the secret to filmmaking is to realize that ultimately film is a rather boring medium, because basically someone can read much faster than they can soak in information as it's relayed on film. And so what that means effectively, if you want to make a film that's interesting, you need several different things happening at once at all times, and you intercut them, and then film kind of comes into its own. And there are at least 3 things going on in this film. There's plot 1, if you like, which is the history of the American organ. And that is fascinating, but on the other hand, if it was only a film about the history of the American organ, it might be kind of one-dimensional. The second strand is the people, the human element. So you've just been introduced to our lovely students who are involved with the film, both on camera and off camera. They form a kind of continuum going from location to location, and we sort of, in a sense, experience organ music through their eyes. We have the characters, both Laurie and Annie are in the film. Laurie will be filmed on Monday, and Annie has been filmed quite a bit till now. We have other people, and part of the loveliness of film is that people might only be on for 5 or 10 minutes of screen time or less. Think of someone like the pastor we've just seen. But it's if you can extract the warmth of their personality, then that is a vehicle by which you make the story engaging. And then the third aspect of the plot is perhaps slightly more downbeat. Hopefully it might turn out to be upbeat, and that's about the relative incline or decline of the pipe organ's fortunes, and how it is alive and well, or not alive and not well, in contemporary culture. And the fact is, 100 years ago, an awful lot more people heard organ music than they do today. But on the other hand, that top of the pyramid now, the standard of organ playing and organ building is higher than it's ever been. It's just it doesn't affect as many people. So that is our third sort of big sort of implement, part of the story, our third story. So anyway, that's all I want to say. I hope that sounds interesting, and I hope you find the trailer interesting, which I think they'll play in a second.
I'm Anne Laver, and I am an organist and a teacher. I fell in love with the pipe organ as a college student in my 20s, and ever since then, I have devoted much of my time and energy to learning how to play the organ and sharing that knowledge with others. The organ is the most interesting instrument because every generation, every culture comes up with its own idea of what an organ is and creates unique and utterly different instruments. Traditionally, people have seen Europe as the richest source of this musical and historical variety. But they've overlooked a country which today has more organ builders than everywhere else put together. That's here in the United States. We have an unbroken history of 250 years of organ building, with every kind of instrument being built to the highest standards. It's something we should celebrate. But now this amazing culture is under threat. Fewer and fewer people interact with it, and declining numbers of young people choose to be organists. To me, that's a call to action. Here in upstate New York, we have an amazingly rich collection of organs that essentially tells the story of the organ in America. We will take you inside the region's most spectacular instruments and introduce you to the world-class organists who play them. We will highlight the wonder and variety of this magnificent instrument and reveal its uniquely American contexts and expressions. We will also follow a cast of college students as they discover their passion for the instrument and try to imagine a future for it. That's why I'm making this film, to celebrate the organ and its music.
Yeah, so that's our trailer. Here's Will. We are so excited about this project. I mean, it's been we started filming back last April, and yeah, I've learned a ton from the experience, and we hope that it will be ready by the end of this calendar year. But if you sign up to Organ Cinema, is that organcinema.com, right, Will?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so occasionally we're going to drop little bits and pieces that are ready, you know, some of the demos and things like that. And you could subscribe to organcinema.com for an annual fee, somewhere around 125 pounds, I think. If you are curious about Will's other films, there's tons and tons of material there, and you can be an organ expert in a year watching all of that stuff, and you'll be able to stay in touch with this project. You can also find out more about it if you go to the film webpage, which is organinamerica.com. So we are definitely looking for support at this point to complete the film. We have raised over $100,000 to do what we've done so far. And but if anybody has ideas about how we can make that final push, we'd love to hear from you. There's a very easy way to contribute via Syracuse University if you'd like to do that. At this point, I think Will and I can take some questions, and then we can let you eat some more and build the organ if you want. How's that sound? Yeah? Well. Yeah, any questions? Okay, Derek?
We have one on Zoom,
One on Zoom.
asking, are you gonna do any film festivals with this?
Are we gonna do film festivals, Will? What do you think?
Potentially. Film festivals can be a lot of energy for not much return, but if there was a good film festival, which was worth it, then yes, potentially. There are thousands of documentaries being made at any one time, most of which are terrible. And if you go into that sort of film festival world, you're suddenly in this big tank load of content. And there is also a logic to staying well clear of that and having our own bespoke distribution. So I'm not completely averse to them, but we've got lots of other plans as well.
Yeah, we have been working with a consultant to share our film on PBS, and Will has actually been quite successful with PBS distribution for his other films. So we're hopeful that that'll be a great place for this. And you know, we'll keep our eyes open for other ways to get it out. But we think that is probably that's the audience we're gearing towards, PBS audience. And not, you know, this film really is going to be for a general audience, one that doesn't necessarily know about the organ. However, we think it will be interesting, and it'll go deeply enough for the organ community as well. So that's our goal. Yeah, other questions? Yeah, Ben?
This would be a good time to announce our events at the end of March.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the prompt. So the Syracuse AGO chapter is a very active chapter, and they've been doing all kinds of great work. They do throughout the year. You can become a member very easily. We are, for the third year now, hosting a Syracuse Pipe Organ Festival, and that will be March 27, 28, 29. It starts with the Oyster competition, a national competition. We've just selected our 3 finalists, excellent players. They're going to play at St. Paul's Episcopal Church Friday night. Then there's an organ crawl. Then there's Annie Spink's recital. She's sitting in the back Saturday afternoon at 2. And then I'm giving the dedication concert for an organ that was newly installed in Syracuse Catholic Center, built by Greg Harold. So that's Sunday, the 29th. So we got a lot of stuff coming up. And if you like organ, then there's plenty of ways to connect. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I was wondering, for people who know of old organs, how can they want to learn more about their own local organs and stuff? Are there resources you suggest?
I would say talk to Ben. Look Ben Merchant up. Well, if it's local to this area, that would be the person I would start with. There is also the Oregon Historical Society. Laurence Libin was the president of the Oregon Historical Society. I was chair of the finance board a while ago. But that is a really great national resource, and they have a pipe organ database that you can search if you're looking for information about a specific organ. If you notice that the instrument at your venue is not on there, then take some pictures and send them in, and the team will have a look and upload them. But those are 2, I think, local resource in Ben and national resource in the OHS.
And that database is really easy to use.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody, if you know the name of the church in the town, or it'll take kind of any information you have, find what you're looking for.
Yeah, it is very easy to use. Yes.
I have a question that's probably the best answer, but then
Okay.
in order to build and working on this organ, you have to know how to play it as well. Or can you play it?
In order to build an organ, do you have to know how to play it?
No.
It helps. As I said.
So I'm a poor player, but I can demonstrate. My gifts tend to be more technical rather than as a musician. But I have a good ear, so I can really voice, blend sounds, and achieve good results.
And an organ shop needs so many different talents. You need woodworkers, you need people that can work with pipes, you need people like Ben who can take the voicing to its final step and really have a good understanding of how the pipes should blend together. You need electricians. you need welders. Yeah, it's an interesting enterprise. There are a lot of skills that are necessary to produce new organs. Yeah.
I presume that the film is sort of pipe organ purist. In other words, it's about the organs in America, but not, for example, about Hammond.
All right, good question. Right. Is this film going to be about pipe organs only? Well, did you see the keyboard setup there at the ballpark? Electronic organs are part of the landscape. Hammond organ, actually the Hammond has a good connection to this area. I think, didn't Lawrence Hammond go to Cornell?
He went to Cornell, yes.
He went to Cornell. Yeah, so I mean, there's a very important local connection there that I think we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge it. That's not where my heart is, but I do think it is. When I talk to my friends about this project, or I talk to people about, from Europe about this project, they almost always say, "Oh, are you going to include the stadium organs?" That's the American organ that I like. That's what they know. Not even theater organs, but like the ballpark organ. Yeah. And it was talking to a friend of mine. I thought, oh my God, I guess we do have to do that. I mean, I wasn't really thinking about it, but that's where many people hear organ music. I mean, that is not as we talked to. So the guy that you saw is the longest running sports organist in history. He turned down the Yankees and has been playing the organ at the Rochester Red Wings Stadium for 40 years. He's really great. Fred Costello. And, we had an interview with him and he said, well, this isn't an organ. It's a couple of keyboards, but I can make it sort of sound like a Hammond, and this is what I do. And he presses a couple buttons and he gets the beats going. And I don't know, it's part of the music culture, and I think we should at least acknowledge it. So I hope that answers your question.
Can I just make a point? I'm a huge fan of the Hammond organ, so there'll be nothing. The Hammond organ won't be included simply as a kind of, oh well, we'd better include the Hammond. I think it's a genuinely great instrument with its own genuine kind of sound and kind of identity, and I think also the Hammond is, I think, the most recorded musical instrument ever. I mean, even more than the piano. I think it's just the number of records it's been on. So yes, that will be a good part of the film.
Anything else? Yes.
Where is the organ with the most number of pipes?
Largest organ? Where is that, Lori? Atlantic City. Yeah.
That's over 30,000.
30,000 pipes in Atlantic City. Go check it out. It's pretty awesome.
How many manuals?
I don't know, 6, 7 manuals. I haven't been there, but yeah. Yeah, there are these, I mean, in the early 20th century, there are these mammoth organs that were built just because we could, so there's some pretty spectacular examples of that. Yeah. All right, I think we should break. You guys have been sitting for a long time. I really appreciate your attention. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Laura. And thank you, Eric. It's been a pleasure to be here. You want to say anything? Yes.
Wrap it up. All right. Well, thank you to all of our presenters today. You were all excellent. I think we all learned a lot, and thank you to our audience as well. This was great.